The nature of style. Style is not the man. It is something better. It is a dizzy, dazzling structure that he erects about himself, using as building materials selected elements from his own character. Style is the way in which a man can, by taking thought, add to his stature. It is the only way. There is a book written by Mr. Clive Bell on civilization, almost the whole bulk of which is taken up with a catalogue of the things that civilization is not. In pursuit of style, I humbly tread a parallel path. Style is not fashion. Style is not wealth. Style is not learning. Style is not beauty. All of this will be demonstrated presently. But it is as well to make the last point clear at the start, because plainness is an excuse too often put forward by failures. A pretty face, they claim, opens all doors. This was never quite true. It may once have opened all bedroom doors, but these have recently been taken off their hinges by the architects of moral open planning. Therefore, the keys of this particular kingdom no longer bestow any privilege. What a stylist needs is glamour, a far more powerful force than mere prettiness. Glamour exists where something not clearly defined seems to be promised but never given. In any case, it is in poetry rather than in the Times that we read of society being ruled and empires overthrown by the beauty of a woman. It was Mr. Marlowe who believed that Helen burned the topless towers of Ilium. The rest of us may suspect that Mr. Menelaus paid his wife's fare. Style is an idiom arising spontaneously from the personality, but deliberately maintained. It is not stylishness. Above all, it is not something snatched out of the air and donned to shock or shame the neighbors. Mr. Oscar Wilde, considered by some the great expert on this subject, said that, in matters of importance, it was not sincerity that mattered, but style. To the true stylist, they are the same thing. You need to cultivate a lifestyle first for your own benefit, to give you a firm belief in your own identity, and to prevent you from importuning others for their approval to make up for your lack of self-esteem. You need a lifestyle in your dealings with others only to a lesser degree. It will tell them instantly who and what you are. This cuts the dead wood out of living conversation, and makes plain to your friends, and even to strangers, what questions you can profitably be asked. In the end, you have only one thing to offer the world that no one else can give, and that is yourself. I cannot conceal the agonized contortions by which I am convulsed in my efforts to find a definition of style that will not be too unpalatable to the English. It may seem strange that this should be so difficult. The soil of this other Eden used to be ideally suited to the growth of oddities. Indeed, it has been said that England has more eccentrics to the square mile than any other country in Europe, and Dame Edith Sitwell, who made a study of them, would have agreed. We used to treasure our eccentrics because they were living examples of the rights of the individual. With their boyish pranks, they defied the conventions that others accepted but secretly found irksome. Under a luring social system that made manners more powerful than law, and in a landscape where the garden fence was a barricade, their insouciant follies seemed like acts of heroism. In the present permissive society, almost nothing seems odd. If anything remains to be broken down, it is the convention of being unconventional. In order to defy any other unwritten law, a man would have to resort to acts of the crudest and most wanton bravado. As soon as we contemplate anything so gross, we realize that, if this is now the extreme to which eccentrics would be driven, they would be but weeds in a garden whose flowers are stylists. In Britain, sad to say, to make the distinction in this way is still not necessary to praise style. There lurk among us nature lovers who refer to weeds as wildflowers, dog lovers who prefer mongrels to thoroughbreds, people who would rather do social work than enjoy society. These men and women are determined to perpetuate the English ideal of naturalness. That, as a nation, we have had for centuries so little immediacy does not, for them, dim this illusion. Possibly it makes it brighter. Until these last few years, spontaneity has never been seen in action on a large scale. Now it has. The full horror of it has been poured over us, but the ideal of behaving naturally still lingers weakly in the hearts of the elderly and the middle-aged, kept from total collapse only by dint of never calling a looking-glass a mirror. This dying race worships the haphazard, the nonchalant, the unaffected. There have, of course, been men so perfectly English that they understood this situation and dealt with it by using an anti-style. Such a man was Sir Winston Churchill. Reading his books makes it clear that he was a greater master of prose than of politics, but he was never tempted to let this gift come between him and his audience. His mumbling hesitations and his mispronunciation of foreign, and therefore filthy, words were not blemishes on his style of oratory. On the contrary, they were an actor's tricks with which he beguiled the world into believing in his honesty of purpose. How perverse this kind of Methodism would have sounded to some of his predecessors. Mr. David Lloyd George could never have borne to condescend so far, but then he lived in an age when the huddled masses seldom expected to follow explicitly the whole of any public speech. A dog understands not from words, but from a tone of sickening briskness added to its master's voice, that it is being invited to take exercise. Lovers of literature know that they are listening to poetry because of the reader's swooning diction. So the man in the street of 50 years ago took courage in adversity, not so much from strong political argument, as from the sight of a mane of white hair unfurled in the wind, from a Welshman's perfect vocal pitch, and from orotund references to the Prince of Peace. Though I secretly long for it, I dare not plead for a return to that world reverberating with rhetoric. I ask only that logic prevail, and that we quickly come to realize that, so far from being an obscure insult to our hearers, it is a compliment to them that we present our ideas gift-wrapped. People who cry out without premeditation are merely in danger of revealing their emotions, a practice never to be approved. To have feelings is a weakness. To give expression to them is disgusting. Those of us who choose our words carefully stand at least a chance of avoiding this pitfall, and instead of saying what we mean. I have been accused of identifying style and standard of living. I don't, but I would say this. To a physicist, money would be the solid state of style. That is to say, that you can convert your style into riches and enjoy them, or you can enjoy your style just the way it is. As fast as the left-wingers, crouching around their state-owned cauldron, stir the world's wealth into a weak, unappetizing paste, it goes lumpy again. The idealists imagine that, if the planet's resources were doled out fairly, there would be plenty for everyone. In fact, if this were done, prosperity would lie on the earth's crust as thinly as margarine on workhouse bread. This state of affairs would be acceptable to moralists who believe in atonement. Stylists, who prefer happiness, could only deplore it. A modest sufficiency cramps style. Extreme poverty, like great danger, enriches it. Here is an example. In Soho, the hooligan district of London, there lived a woman known to her fellow hooligans as the Countess. She suffered from almost all the ill effects of undernourishment and exposure to inclement weather. She had no fixed address and no means of support, and her body was perpetually bent double from a lifelong habit of looking into trash cans to see if she could find something she could possibly sell to a kind friend, or if not, that she herself might be able to use. One day, in a garbage can in the most expensive part of London, she found a complete backless beaded dress. She longed for night to fall so she could nip into a dark doorway and try it on. But by about 6:30 her patience was worn out. It was barely dusk, but she went into a churchyard in the middle of London, and there she proceeded to take off her clothes. This caused a crowd to collect, and the crowd caused a policeman to collect. The next day, in court, when the magistrate said, "And what exactly were you doing, stripping among the dead?" she replied, "I was doing what any woman would be doing at that hour, changing for dinner." Although there still exists the marvelous world of financial extremes that made this gesture possible, we cannot claim that the atonement mongers have had no success. They have changed the feel of money. They have made it heavier. Whenever I read about the Medicis, those darlings of the color supplements, I see instantly that this is so. I do not know if Lorenzo called himself magnificent. Like the earliest governess I can remember, he may have considered that sort of thing for others to say. He certainly felt magnificent, and seems to have thought of his immense wealth as an attribute of his character. He used it to glorify himself and Florence, which was but a second body. He patronized the goldsmiths and artists of his province, not as an act of charity, but for the purpose of shameless self-aggrandizement. Nowadays the rich buy period paintings as an investment, and modern ones as a penance. The nearest thing I can think of to a modern Medici was Mr. William Randolph Hearst. He was rich beyond the wildest dreams of the tax collectors, and though money is not in itself style, he made a flat-out attempt to live as though it were. To some extent he succeeded. He took up residence in California, whose climate encourages the growth of personality, as Hiroshima favors the spread of panic grass and feverfew. His home there, San Simeon, was the physical territory of his ego. Everyone in the movie colony, and some who only wished they were in it, struggled to get into his presence. They would allow the most horrible practical jokes to be played upon them, simply as a price for being allowed to breathe such opulent air. To modernize, his image has become slightly confused with that of Mr. Orson Welles, but at the height of his powers he was a colossus of style. Journalists who endeavor to belittle him do but nip at his ankles. If money were all, the rich men who have been lured to California would have gone there presumably for the oil and the aircraft, rather than for the movies. To anyone who is purely a financier, the film industry must surely have been an unnecessarily hazardous investment, even before the fall. Miss Bessie Love, who made her first film in 1915, says that Hollywood is just a place where people live. But it is hard not to think that it was also the city of dreams. The lure was the opportunity to enter, at the risk of being stung, a place buzzing with the most beautiful people in the world, and to take them in the swarm. For a while Mr. Howard Hughes indulged himself with this whim. Then, having invented Miss Jane Russell, he seems to have decided that, In terms of style, there were no new worlds to conquer. Men like these, who in some sense make wealth their lifestyle, are nearly always American, or at least Americanized. This is only natural. In the islands of the blessed, money bestows a kind of sanctity. Elsewhere, far more often than wealth leading to fame, fame becomes a source of income. On this unfashionable side of the Atlantic, wealth has become less an element in which to wallow than something for which the possessor must pay. There is a sense in which, however many naughts we have after our names, conscience has made paupers of us all. The Florentine touch has gone. Although Mr. J. Paul Getty was born in America, he became anglicized. We never saw him swathed in crimson plush and clanking with amulets, strutting through the supermarkets of Woking. In a time gone by, the rich had many pastimes. The poor had only one. Their numbers were bound to increase. As they multiplied, so did the volume of their lamentations. For centuries the rich ignored the whimpering of the underdogs, but finally they became concerned. They did not, I need hardly say, give up their wealth, but they changed their style of exhibiting it. Classicism is the style of pseudo-penitence. Mr. Torres, the great designer of clothes for men, expresses the situation sartorially. The French Revolution, he said, killed satins for men. As long as society, from classical times onward, was built on guiltless wealth and God-given ennobling poverty, style of a kind grew on trees. We still live in a world where splendor and misery coexist, but the notion that a poor person might, by filling in a coupon or writing a pop song, become rich, has robbed the states of both wealth and poverty, of their certitude, their continuity, and their sanctity. This makes them poor soil on which to build a style. It was through the world's treatment of my mother that I personally first became aware that financial barriers were crumbling. My mother was middle class and middle brow, but she rightly regarded the suburbia in which we were compelled to live as a sort of purgatory of style. She had her own ways of improving the lustreless hour. There was a moment when, as a child, I stood beside her in a butcher's shop. She was just about to place an order with the man behind the counter, when another customer darted into the place and interrupted my mother in order to say, "Mr. Jennings, I simply must tell you that I ate the pork chop you sold me yesterday at 10 o'clock at night and slept like an angel." "You will pardon me," my mother began slowly, "but the angels never sleep. They cry continually, day and night, though whether because of the late eating of pork chops, the book of Revelations doesn't say." When, because it was wartime, and various economies had set in, I later in the same day saw my mother lay the fire and black the grate herself, I felt that a discrepancy of style had occurred. It had not. My mother's lifestyle, that of a muted Lady Bracknell, remained intact, but her financial status had undoubtedly changed. True style changes less and less as it moves toward its perfection, and once complete, is unalterable by outward circumstances, or even by time itself.